Hey everyone, it's Peter Cole, and I'm back again with a short video today. I promise this one's going to be short. I'm trying to make them shorter. This is part of my Intro to Orchestral Sample Library series. I've done a whole bunch of those for beginners, and I'll leave a link to that series in the description of this video. And the last few videos we've been doing has just been focused on percussion, so the percussion family, and how to use our digital audio workstations to make our percussion sound more realistic, as well as just to get an understanding of kind of a little bit more of how percussion works. I actually started as a drummer. I learned how to play drums before I learned any other instruments. So it's kind of something I've literally hands-on experience beating the drums starting when I was like 12 years old. So I do love percussion. And I think it helps me a little bit when I'm writing for percussion because I actually had played a real drum set. All right, and so in the last percussion video I did, we started getting deeper into quantization, and I'm going to pick up where that video left off, and we're going to specifically focus just in this video a quick kind of review of some more of the tools we have available to make our percussion performances sound more realistic. And specifically today I've got a focus on swing, which I didn't really touch much on in the other videos. I kind of blew over it a little because it's hard to talk about. It's hard for me to explain, but we're going to really look at a crystal clear example today. So let's get started. All right, so I have created 3 performances here. Hopefully you can see I have an 8th note performance, and we're going to play around with swing on that. 16th note, and then we have 16th note triplets. So we're going to go one at a time. And what I want you to listen for is what happens when I adjust the swing dial here. Or actually, what is this called? This is the swing slider. It's not a dial. Now there's a couple of things I just want to call out within Logic. There's this thing up here in the top left, the region editor, and you get a lot more controls here. Keep in mind that when you're touching this, when you're playing with this, you're touching everything within that region. So currently I have my 8th note swing region selected. So if I were to play around up here, and I'm not going to do it yet, but we'll do it in a second, but you'll see all the notes change at the same time. And that's a perfectly fine way of doing it. The editor down here, which I actually prefer, it's main things you need access to. I find it quite helpful. And this one, you can go literally note by note. So if I wanted to just quantize these 2 notes, for example, I could do that with my interface right here, as opposed to kind of the macro, you can think of it, the region interface above here. So that's just one quick call out. So first, though, I'm going to actually play around with my, I guess I'll call it my local editor. I use this one a lot. For one thing, it's very handy. It's right here. I can see all my notes. I can see what the slider is doing instantly. And again, I can edit individual notes one at a time if I really wanted to do that. And sometimes that's necessary, right? We sometimes need to edit one note at a time. So I have a really quick little kind of cheesy little beat here, but let's just listen to how it sounds currently. Wow. Amazing drumming going on. So there's a couple things to listen for in addition to the amazing performance. Notice that some of the cymbals sound louder than others. So of course that's the velocity that I'm going to have to fix here in a second. So when I recorded this, for whatever reason, when I hit my finger on the keyboard, because I wasn't playing a drum, of course, I hit some notes a little louder, or at least that's how my DAW registered it. So it recorded it at that volume. So that's the thing that stands out the most probably to everyone. It's like, why are there these random loud cymbals? Sometimes you want, a variety of velocity, don't get me wrong, but in this case, that sounds a bit extreme. Now, I already, to be honest, did a little bit of quantization ahead of time. So if you zoom in here, you'll see that it's not that far off. Some beats or some hits are ahead of the beat. So, here we go. Some are behind, like this one. And of course, as we talked about in the last video, sometimes that's good. If it's too on the grid, right? If it's too lined up with all these lines, then it's almost too robotic. So that's one of the things we're playing around with. So when you're playing around with swing, it's a combination of, playing with your quantized slider, the strength of your quantization, as well as the swing. Rather than kind of talk about it and try to explain it in that way, I figured let's actually zoom in on the MIDI notes and see exactly what swing's doing, and it makes it a lot easier to understand. So let's zoom in here. I'm going to select, because again, I'm playing with in my local editor here, not the region editor. So I'm going to be playing with the sliders right here next to me. I have created an eighth note swing. What I mean by that is that you see my ride cymbal here. It's just playing eighth notes, so it's not double timing it like we'll hear in a second. Hopefully you saw my other video, because I have a whole other video where we're talking about purely counting notes, and so that's why it's kind of a dry video, I'll be honest, and it's not the most exciting. But if you're new to counting rhythms and reading music in general, that's a helpful one to just start, and it's not that long. I'll link to it right here in this video. You can click on that if you want to try that first. But you want to have a bit of an understanding of what note values are, how to count them, because that's what we're using right now, right? We're going to be using the quantization interface to edit these note values. So it's helpful to know what types of note you're editing. So in this case, these are eighth notes. So within one beat, I'm playing these eighth notes. If you count them out, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So that's why they're eighth notes. And this starts the new bar here on this 2. So here's the first bar starts at 1 and then ends here and starts over again at 2. So there's 8 notes. So makes sense, right? 8 notes. All right, so we talked about that enough. So now I'm going to select all these guys, and I'm going to I'm going to play around with the quantization. First, I'm going to crank it all the way up to 100%, and you'll see all the notes shift perfectly onto the grid. Let's hear how that sounds. So you can hear, I mean, it's definitely much tighter because it's 100% on the grid. Let's leave it there for now. We can always go and unslide it, right? Slide it back to where it was if you want. And believe me, I do that a lot. That's why I love this feature. And I like using the local editor like right here because you get such control. But now let's play around with swing. So here we are. We've got our eighth note swing, and I'm going to increase it. So right now, and what I want you to look for is look at the notes that are actually changing. So watch what happens as I play this and adjust the swing. Hopefully you can see, and you're not too distracted by the crazy sounding rhythm that's going on here. Hopefully you can see what's happening is it's actually affecting every other eighth note. So that essentially is what swing is it's actually affecting the second eighth notes. That's what gives it the swing. Boom. So the first one is more on, second one is a little behind the beat. That's what creates the swing, and that's what creates that kind of variety of the sound. Now, of course, if you go all the way to 100, it doesn't always sound good. Let's hear what this one sounds like. Actually, it's not so bad. See how that swing? So it changed it completely from a straight ahead, just kind of straight boom, tuck, boom, tuck, boom, tuck, to now we've got a little bit of a feel in there. Let's listen to again what it sounds like without the swing. And with the swing. Let's just crank it up to 80. Down a little bit to 40. I gotta fix that velocity on that cymbal. It's driving me crazy. So you can see now, hopefully that helps out. You can get a little more of an idea of what swing's doing. And again, it's because I'm affecting, these are eighth notes, and I am affecting the swing on the eighth note value. So it's going in there and saying, okay, you got a bunch of eighth notes. Well, we're gonna move every other eighth note behind the beat a little. So that's what creates that swing. Now, what I usually recommend is, particularly for like orchestral music, and you're doing like, big orchestral music. This might not be you're not going to be playing these kind of beats necessarily. Maybe you are. Maybe you got like hybrid music going on. But the thing with swing is you can apply a little of it in any kind of genre and any style of percussion that's going on, because it's going to, if nothing else, it's going to create a little bit more of a looser feel, because you are slightly offsetting, at least in the eighth note case that we're looking at here, you're slightly offsetting every other note, and that creates kind of that, it just creates more interest and tension, and makes it a little bit less robotic sounding. So it's always something good to play with, I recommend. Okay, so now let's listen to how it sounds with a 16th note swing. So now we have 16 notes in there. And of course, if I were to count these all up, I'm not going to do it now, but we have doubled the amount of notes on our ride cymbal. So listen to how that sounds. 1 E and a 2 E and a 1 E. So again, I went over counting and note values in a previous video, which I'll include in the description of this one. But if we were to count those out, they're counted as 1 E and a 2 E and a 1 E, right? So you're counting it out differently than you would the eighth notes. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And different counting, obviously, and it sounds different. A lot more notes going on. However, we can still play around with swing, of course, but this time we got to be mindful to adjust the 16th note value. So I select my notes, and by the way, if I wanted to, I could just swing the ride cymbal. And I often do that in these cases, because sometimes I want actually the drums to be a little off from each other. Let's try it that way and see how that sounds. So I've just selected my ride cymbal, so I'm only going to be affecting the swing of the ride. And let's crank that up as I play, and look at the notes that are changing. See, hopefully you can see again, it's every other note. That's how the swing is working. It's going in there saying, okay, now you got 16th notes. Okay, well, every other 16th note, we're going to just move back behind the beat a little. Creates a little bit of that swing. Now, this is at 100%, so this dramatically changes the rhythm, right? It's like a completely different rhythm. We crank it back down. And of course, I can't literally tell you the values to use, because it depends entirely on the style of music and what you're going for. But hopefully you can get an idea like what swing is doing, at least, right? You can kind of see how it's affecting the sound. Now, of course, I did not affect the swing of the other instruments. So there we go. That's swing on a 16th note. Okay, so now let's take a look at quantizing triplets. So triplets are unique because they're counted in groups of 3, right? So you're fitting in 3 notes where maybe normally we would fit a more even number of notes, like 2 or 4 or 8, right? So in a triplet has a very unique sound. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. If you look here in my piece, that's what's going on. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So see these downbeats? Every one of these downbeats here, we're starting another group of 3. And in a bar, so in this case, we're going from bar 5 to bar 6. We've got this group of 3, this group of 3, this group of 3, and this group of 3, right? So a bunch of 3s in there. And again, it's counted 1, 2, 3. And it gives it that very kind of naturally swingy sound already. But of course, I want to go in and tighten it up a bit. If we look at my notes up close, again, we're trying to equally divide the space into groups of 3. So sometimes it works out good and records pretty close, but then sometimes the notes don't get perfectly recorded properly. That's what quantization's for. Quantization. So then we go over to our quantization tool and we select 16th note triplets. Let's select that, and I'm going to slowly bring up the strength, and you can see it kind of moving the notes into place. So we go all the way up to 100, and now let's listen to that. Now some of my, I didn't quantize the bass drum and the snare, so that's why they sound a little funky. Let's quantize those. Now everything's quite stiff for now, but of course we can always go back and loosen that up later. But you get the idea. That's how you quantize triplets. Okay, so now I'm going to talk kind of briefly about Flam. What the heck is Flam? So Flam is something I definitely know as a drummer, because if you play drums, you know that whenever you hit one drum at the same time with two sticks, no matter what you do, they're not always going to hit exactly at the same time. And that's actually, over the years, developed into a style, and it's on purpose that you don't want to hit them on time. It creates that sort of, hopefully you can hear that. It's like, fill up, Flam. If you want to make your drums sound more realistic, play around with Flam. Don't make every hit always hit perfectly on time. The Flam makes it sound more natural. That's the way a drummer plays. Now there's a tool within Logic actually called Flam, and we're going to look at that a little bit. I'll be honest, I actually prefer to go in and manually edit my Flams. Sounds funny saying that, edit my Flams, because I want to have a little bit more control. I want to know what's going on, and I want to be able to adjust it. But if you want to, you can use the tool inside of Logic. So I have a little performance here, and it's literally just a bunch of different hits. I want you to listen to, this is just a bunch of snare drums hitting. Oops, let me mute the other one. Okay, so that probably sounds a little weird to you, but what's going on here? Well, if we zoom up close, we initially just have one snare hit. Then we have two snare hits, but you can see one is slightly behind the other. This is what a Flam is. Then we have two snare hits at the exact same time, so not flamming. Then we have three hits, all kind of separated. This is another example of a Flam, and so forth, right? And then I'm giving you examples so you can hear each one and how they sound a little different. Listen again. One thing I really want to call out is you notice how here we have two playing slightly off, two playing at the exact same time. Listen to how the two playing slightly off actually has a little more of a, first of all, a natural sound, to me anyway, but also it's almost even louder. So this Flam here is a bit extreme, and I'm not sure if that's, I would keep it with that. I did it on purpose to make it really exaggerated, but I really want you to just hear how these two notes slightly off, just that slight little separation there, it actually makes the drum sound a little bit more, I don't know if louder is the right word, but it has a little bit more impact, it has more punch. And that's one reason why we really like to use Flams. If you're working with orchestral music, for example, and you want to look at ways of making your drums sound a little more punchy and stick through the mix, rather than layering on a bunch of different drum sounds or you know, just keep clogging the sound field with different hits and frequencies, consider just stepping back for a minute and playing around with Flam. Take a snare drum and offset it a little bit, or works with toms, with any drum, any kind of percussion. Just rather than adding on top and on top and on top, play around with Flams, offset the hits, and it could have even more of an impact. And I have an example later on. I want to do a video on some sound design that I worked on, building some really powerful hits. And the way I got them so powerful was through Flam, by flamming the sounds, not by adding tons of different drum hits to it, but by actually having less drum hits, but having them offset a little. So once again, now up here in your region editor, you do have Flam. I just want to call this out. I don't use this as much. And the reason, at least for drums, I think it's actually beneficial for other instruments, and that might be another video someday. But watch again what's happening when I select this. It's just basically offsetting, it's affecting the offset of the flam. So you can go really crazy and pretty soon turn it into something unrecognizable, and you go in both directions, positive in this case, and now I'm going to go negative. And so now you see how it's shifting it in the opposite direction. So now the top hit is first and the bottom hit is second. Now that's a little too extreme for me. That's not really the sound I'm after at the moment, but you have that ability and you can play around with it, and you can see how much fun you can have creating completely different sounds through the use of flam. So flamming, whatever it's called, you wanna think about it as a tool when you are producing percussion in your compositions, because it really helps with the more. It helps to create a more natural sound, because this is how a drummer would actually play. All right, so really quick on velocity, and the only thing I'm really going to talk about with velocity, I'm going to go back again to my funny example at the beginning with the crazy. Now, of course, I think it's kind of obvious if you look at my velocity chart thing down here. This, of course, if you're not familiar, this is showing all the different velocities of the hits. So the one up here is a high one, and the ones down here is a low one, so a soft hit. So what I do, and you can actually, once again, do this in your region editor up here under, I think it's Q velocity and Q strength. Perfectly fine to do that. I'm a fan, again, of the local editor, so I'm going to show you how to do it down here. I'm going to select, what I want to do essentially is kind of quantize and compress the velocity so it's not so all over the place. Now, sometimes you want a lot of velocity in your piece. In a piece like this, a straight ahead drum beat like this, I don't want so much. So I'm going to select, in this case, all the instruments or all the hits, right? So it's all selected, and watch what happens. I'm going to kind of pull it down like this and see how it's kind of compressing it. Now, of course, it's also lowering the velocity, but hold on, we'll fix that in a second. The main thing I want to do right now is just bring everything closer together, like compressing the velocity. So now when I get something that's a little more natural, now I can use this slider and raise it back up. Now when we listen, oops, sorry, I have my flam track on. I was wondering what that was. So now it's a much more consistent. It might be too consistent, right? So one thing you can do is you can go in here, and a common thing is the first hit of the ride cymbal is usually a little louder, right? Of each bar, or at least each section. So raise those up. You could also play around with the swing. Oops, didn't want that much. Oh, see what happens? I wasn't paying attention and I adjusted the quarter note swing. Definitely not correct, right? We're on eighth notes. So let's adjust the eighth note. So that's going over. Sometimes it's fun to play around. There's probably a way to do this with this in the macro editor, but play around with those swung notes, the velocity of the swung notes, because sometimes they are a little bit higher. Now I'm going to exaggerate it now just so you can hear it. Now can you hear that? Now again, I've exaggerated it for listening purposes, but see how the swung notes are a little bit higher in velocity? That creates that. So velocity is a composition tool. We got to remember that. Sometimes we forget. We think it's just about how hard you hit the instrument. Absolutely. With percussion, it's also, there's an aspect of the composition, like how the song is actually going to sound to the listener just by how hard you hit it, what things you emphasize. In this case, I emphasize the swung notes. So those offbeat notes were getting louder. All right, so hopefully this was helpful. I know kind of a bunch of different concepts here we talked about. Again, picking up where we left off before in the video previously about quantization, and we dug a little bit deeper focusing on swing, because swing is such a fun tool to play with. And then, of course, we talked just a little bit about triplets as well, because that's another thing you want to learn how to use the quantize tool for, especially when we get down the road talking about polyrhythms. Then we talked a little bit about flamming, And again, I like to do flamming hands-on myself, moving the notes myself. I don't use the computer's tools as much in that case. That's just me. But the main concept I wanted you to understand is what a flam is and what it sounds like and how to use it in your compositions. And then, of course, we touched just slightly on velocity. I'm going to get into velocity much deeper in the next video, I promise, because that's a whole nother subject and it's a lot of fun to get into that. So again, thank you so much for your time watching this video. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.